let's delete these. And let's delete all these extraneous things we've got here. We don't need the super rough since this is just a demo. I don't really care about it. Let's go ahead and give this guy yellowy, warmish yellowy skin tone. We'll put this layer right underneath there. Okay, so there's two ways that I go about flattening things in Procreate, which is different than how I do it in Photoshop to some degree, but we have some limited tools in Procreate, so we have to learn other ways to deal with this. One way, when I'm keeping the lines like this, is I'll just use the hard brush. So we just literally go in like this and start filling in all the spaces. Always adjusting the brush with your other hand. Okay. So this is one way of doing it, and it's a completely acceptable way. This is how I do it most of the time. Then another way that you can do it, once you have sort of some of these borders a little bit better locked down like this, you can then use your selection tool. You can just tap on that, it brings up your selection freehand, and then you can just trap what it is you want to fill, like that. Go ahead and you don't have to click anything else. You can just go right to your layer and then say fill, and you fill that section. So now I'm going to quickly go through here, and I'm going to try and fill this as much as possible. We've got some more tricks that I've recently learned regarding the selection tool, which is pretty great. So usually when I'm doing my very first flat on anything, I sort of consider it my master flat. Sometimes I'll call it my solid. I'll call it a lot of things, but basically it's the core silhouette of whatever it is that I think I'm going to want to be able to grab later. And I'll explain more of that in a second. So here's the core flat. Now, one other thing that I do in Procreate specifically is see these sections where the line doesn't go all the way, or I should say the flat doesn't go all the way to the line. A real simple solution for that is to select your lines and then fill on a new layer, and then it should be filling all the way to the edge, basically. There'll be some spots, in my opinion, where you'll want to clean it up just a touch because you want it to just trail off in spots, but for the most part, it's usually okay. And like when you're against a big red background like this, it's really obvious, you know, how the lines are, but once this becomes like a noisier background, that goes away. So let's quickly make this white. So the reason that I do this big solid is so that I can, let's merge these. There we go. The reason I do this big solid, which looks like this right now, is so that I can so that I can select this for all my shadows. So let's create a new layer. We're gonna just treat this whole thing like it's been, you know, very well flatted. The eyes are flatted, all of that stuff's flatted. Color that I like using for this is sort of a desaturated purpley pink, somewhere around here. set this to multiply, and then I'll use like a soft brush. You can use whatever you want. I've got one tutorial where I use a hard brush. I've got some where I use soft. The nice thing about the soft brush is you can do something big and swathy like that, or you can do something really precise when you shrink it down. So that means you can take something like a shadow that goes like this and gets softer and softer as it goes, and then gets more precise as it goes, you know, like that. So let's clear that. So the reason that I do this big flat is so I can select it. Select contents, and you can see the lines that are going across the paper. Right there. And I can go in here now. Let's say the light is coming from the right. I can paint this shadow layer without worrying at all about going outside the lines. Now, something that I've recently learned, which is a huge time saver, what you'll see in some of my older videos is you'll see something like this. I'll paint, and I'll go outside the line, like that, and I'll go, shit, I forgot to select my layer that time. Or maybe I was doing something else and experimenting, and then I like the way it worked. So this is what you'll see in my old videos. You'll see me fill a layer, like that, and then I'll select my solid or whatever it is that I didn't want to be, whatever it is that I want to have the color, and then I'll clear it from that big layer. So you can see we've got this layer here. Then I'll select that layer and I'll clear. And that was the way that I would select inverse, as you would say in Photoshop, which this would manifest in some of my old videos where you're watching the time lapse of just a bunch of colors would flicker real fast, and then all of a sudden something would be cleared. That's how it would save itself out in Procreate. Now, recently I have been alerted to a completely different way to do this, and I will credit this person in the video. I don't have their name right now on me. So let's do it again. So we've got this where I've gone outside. What you can do is you can select anything. So this is why I didn't know that this existed before, is because when you go like this and you select your layer, all of the stuff at the bottom that shows you your selection tools doesn't appear. So what you do is you actually press and hold on this little guy, the selection thing, which you normally press just when you want to do a selection, and it brings these controls up again. From here, this little button here, the inverse selection button that you didn't know what that weird little thing was, that's what it is. So you press it, boom, selects the inverse. So now you can go back here and you can say clear, and there you go. One other quick little tip is if you have nothing selected, this little guy is not selected at all, you can just press and hold on it and it will automatically grab the last selection that you had. So pretty cool. So let's just quickly go back in here and delete this mess. Okay, so we select this. So let's go back in here and finish some of this shadow stuff. So what I'm doing here is I'm adding by painting a little bit and then using the eraser to pull it back. This is something that I do all the time. It's pretty useful. So let's say we shadow in all of this. Then erase away his lip. I'm going to soften this up a bit. Let's actually fix this nose. So you can see some of the size control that I'm doing here. Part of it is to fit into areas. You know, there's just some areas that are too small, so you need to shrink the size of your brush. And then there are other aspects of it where I'm trying to get a harder edge. So what would be a good example of that? If I were to do something big like this, to try and capture the softness of the shadow that would be part of the bag of his eye. And then I go in with a sharper brush to edge this part. And again, when I say sharper brush, this isn't a different brush, it's just smaller. It's just shrinking it so that it gets a little bit more precise. And so you can see there, the same brush created a harder edge there and a softer edge there. Now if I wanted to really dress this up just to make it look a little bit nicer, I would go to a larger size brush again, and then I would soften the fall off of that a little bit. So now let's go and do the shadow from his brow. I'm being a little bit sloppier here than normal, but oops, that's just, you know, so that you get the gist of what's going on here. So now one thing to point out too is if I'm doing, let's say I'm doing that select paint, select clear technique. So right now I've got the whole head selected. If we were to have another flat in here, let's turn off the shadows for a second. Let's save that color. If I were to have the eye color like this, here's a great example of the select paint, select clear mentality. Actually, I don't know why I would just not go ahead and do this side. And then, I don't know, blue eyes. Why not? So one thing to do here, so that you don't exceed the eye, just go ahead and select the one you've already got. And then you can go like this, and you don't have to worry about going outside of it at all. And same thing on this side. Okay, so there we go. I like to put my glints, my eye glints on top. This is a very cartoony eye glint. We can do a more realistic one later. Meaning on another piece. I don't think it's really worth it on this piece. Oops. Every now and then, I'll accidentally do an undo. That's really annoying. Okay, so there's that. And just to be thorough, let's give him some eye meat. So, there's his basic eye. Now, we go turn our shadow back on. You can see that obviously our shadow was all messed up all over that eye and everything. Let's turn off the glints for a second. So you can see that I didn't really take into account the eye when I was doing the shadow, because mentally, all I was doing was focusing on the skin. That's all I was thinking about. So, if we go through the select paint, select clear method, you've got the skin on the bottom, then the eye meat, then the iris. So in that past video where I really outlined select paint, select clear, this is what it would be. You would then, let's just assume the whole head was painted, or shadowed. It's obviously not. What you would do is you'd go in and you select the eye, select, go back to your shadow layer, and then you clear. And that's going to clear just the part where the eye is. Then you go back to the eye and you select it one more time. So now what you've done is you've completely destroyed whatever shadow you painted over the eye. You've gone back and reselected that eye. So now whatever you paint shouldn't affect anything that on your layer stack is below it. So if you had this thing completely flatted, you essentially just move up your stack, selecting, painting your shadows, selecting and clearing, selecting again, painting your shadows, selecting and clearing, selecting again, painting your shadows, and that's how it goes. So it works like this. I just cleared the eyes, I just selected the eyes, and now I'm going back in here with my brush, and I'm doing the shadow from the eyelid, and I'm doing a bit of a fall off shadow on this side. Let's make this a little tighter around there. Okay, now this eye is almost completely in shadow, so this one's gonna keep getting cleared, which probably isn't the most efficient thing, but just for the sake of showing this method, this is how you do it. So the next, see, I didn't really care about doing that iris too accurately. I could have saved time by just doing the iris, but for the purposes of showing exactly how this would work. Now, let's go to the meat, select the meat, clear the meat, select the meat, and then go back to the shadow. Again, this is pretty insignificant, so I might not do it if I were actually doing the whole thing, but just to show this methodology, that's what that is. So again, iris, select the iris, clear it from the shadow, select the iris again. Now the easy one here is going to be filling this back in. Then you come here and fill this shadow in for the iris. Okay, and so there's the iris shadowed. And then so on and so forth, you would go through all of the layers and you would do that. Now we can flip that glint back on. The glint is on top, so it's not going to be affected by this anyways. It's on top of everything, even the lines. So that would be how I would move through the entire piece, assuming that he was a little bit more complicated, right? He would have, you know, hair, maybe a hat, maybe some whatever it is. Now, one other quick trick for painting skin in this methodology. Again, this is one way of doing it. It's not the only way by any stretch of the imagination. Another way to, a trick to getting the skin sort of exactly the way you want it. Let's turn that shadow layer off for a second. Now this can go differently for tons of different people. It depends on the person, it depends on their skin tone, it depends on even just the qualities of them within their own skin tone. So the thinness of the skin or the way their just biology works in general. So what you sort of want to do is on a males are always more fun because you can push the 5 o'clock shadow and really get a lot of skin variance. But the key thing here is the blush layer, what I refer to as the blush layer, the eye socket layer, and the 5 o'clock shadow layer, or the 5-0 layer. So on the skin, let's select skin, go in here. Now this is what I mean by it can vary depending on the people. Some people could have all of the red, all of the blood that's under their skin could be just in their nose, and maybe their skin's thicker over here, or their skin's thicker there, and there's no reason to put it there. It's unlikely, but let's just say. This technique is to try and capture that. So let's just go ahead and make him relatively average. So he's gonna have, you can lay this down really messy at first. A lot of blood in the nose, just a little bit in the cheeks, and then quite a bit in the ear. That's it. Now clean it up. It wouldn't be here, would it? Because the nose ends if you're trying to fill in what this 3D space is. The cheek wouldn't be that heavy. Let's clean this part up. Let's also soften the way it falls off of the nose. Soften this. Soften that just a little bit. Okay, so now we've made it a little bit more natural, albeit very quickly, but we've made it a little bit more natural. Then you can just go into your layer opacity and lower the opacity until it feels right for the character. So that might feel right for this character. Then for a guy, again, because you can get away with more tricks in this way. All of this is, of course, speaking of averages. That's the thing that you have to start thinking about on the art side of things. Usually, now we don't know what color hair this guy has. We just know that it's dark right now because I filled it in dark. It could be maybe this light brown, or maybe it's actually darker than that, or whatever. But a pretty good standard to start with is sort of a blue that sits around here for 5 o'clock shadow. And then you go ahead and fill it in, sort of in general, where you assume he has to shave every day in order to look good. Look good for everybody. And then what I usually do, again, this is speaking about averages because lots of people have different setups to their face. That's what we're going to call it, face setup. I clear this by the ear and I lessen it a little bit on the neck, and then make sure this is a little more defined, just a little bit. I want to keep it relatively soft though. And then I usually clear the lips and sort of like these pockets that usually appear. As a person with a beard, I can tell you that that exists on at least someone. So we go here and we clear the lips. Okay. I know it looks really ridiculous right now, but that's it. And then we do these sort of pockets that go from the corner of the mouth, sort of curve in, and it's sort of where like a soul patch would sit, you know, right there. Okay, so now we've got a guy with a super blue face. Let's fill this in a little bit more. I missed that spot. Okay, and then again, just lower the opacity quite a bit. And you've got what looks like 5 o'clock shadow. Now this can be tweaked a lot. You could go darker with it, assuming the guy's got more like black hair or dark brown hair. You can keep it blue but desaturate it more if you want to. You can make it even more saturated and go for a little bit of a stylistic vibe. You can do any of those things. And that gets you this general look. The last thing that I'll generally do for anybody, whether they're villain or hero or male or female, this doesn't really matter, is I'll go to a bit of a purple, like a light gray purple. And under the eye layer, all of this stuff sits under the eye layer. I'll just put a little darkening around the eyes. And then, of course, because I'm messy there, now we got to clean up around the nose. Okay. Also, I would imagine that eventually this eyebrow would become opaque, which is why I can sort of mess around so much right now. But then I just set that to multiply, so it darkens the whole thing. Now, obviously right there, he looks like he's been up all night, or that he's a crack addict, or that he's a bad guy or something like that. So I just sort of use that as a starting point, and then I lower it to something like that. So that I feel would be comfortable for just sort of like your average dude. He doesn't feel too evil. He doesn't feel anything. He just feels pretty generic, which is sort of what we're going for right now. Then when all of that is said and done, you turn your shadow layer back on. And what do we see now when we look at this? It looks pretty good, but in general, it's actually pretty dark. The shadow I find to be a little bit too dark. So I would go into my layer opacity on that shadow layer and just lower it a bit. There we go. So that right there is sort of a very basic explanation about how all the face stuff works, and then also how the layer stack might look for something like that. So what you got here is you've got your skin layer. In this case, because he's just a head, it's also my base layer for the entire thing. Then you've got the eye darkening. You've got the 5 o'clock shadow. You've got the blush. Then you've got his eye flats, his eye meat flats, his iris flats, shadow layer, line layer, and then those glints are sitting on top. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, please consider liking and subscribing. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are the places where you can find me.